Welcome back to Sayers and Secrets, where every mystery hides a moral and every revelation arrives one step too late. Tonight's case is the murder of a collector, unfolding in whispers of guilt, art, and redemption as a bronze statue becomes the confessional for every sin its owner ever denied. The deeper Wolfe listens, the more the silence speaks. Subscribe to the channel, pour yourself something strong, settle into the shadows, and let the final confession begin. The phone rang just as Fritz was setting down Wolfe's beer, and if there's one sound that can sour his expression faster than a tax notice, it's that one. He gave me the kind of look that suggested I should let it ring itself to death. I didn't. "Nero Wolfe's residence," I said. A woman's voice answered, low and deliberate, the kind that had learned how to stay steady under pressure. "Mr. Goodwin, my name is Evelyn Telford. I must see Mr. Wolfe immediately. It's about my father." I said, "You'll have to be a little more specific. Fathers have been responsible for a lot of trouble in history." "He's dead," she said. "Murdered." That made Wolfe grunt, a short, irritated sound, but it meant he was listening. I covered the receiver and said, "Murdered father, art-world connection, maybe. Should I say you're taking the day off?" "Confound it, Archie," Wolfe muttered. "Invite her to come at once. It will prevent you from wasting the afternoon in fatuous speculation." I told her to come right over. She said she'd be there within 20 minutes. When I hung up, Wolfe was already pretending to have nothing to do with it, nose deep in the latest issue of Orchids Illustrated. He didn't look up until the bell rang, exactly 19 minutes later. The woman who entered the office had the composed look of someone who'd been managing emergencies since childhood. Mid-30s, precise posture, dark-tailored suit that didn't try too hard. Her eyes, though, were working overtime. "Mr. Wolfe," she began, "I appreciate your seeing me on such short notice." He waved a hand lazily. "You may sit, Miss Telford. Condolences for your loss. Please confine yourself to facts." She did. Her father, Samuel Telford, had been one of New York's better-known art collectors, not because he bought the right things, but because he did it loudly. That morning, he'd been found dead in his study at their townhouse off Madison Avenue, a bullet through the heart and a small bronze sculpture missing from his desk. "The police think it was theft," she said, her hands clasped tight. "But I know better. That sculpture wasn't valuable. At least not in money. It was personal." "Everything is personal," Wolfe said. "Describe it." She hesitated. A figure of a man kneeling, hands bound, head bowed. "My father called it the penitent. He bought it in Rome years ago." I asked, "And who had reason to make him penitent?" Her eyes flicked to me, then away. "Almost everyone he knew. He liked to collect people as much as art, and discard them when he was bored." Wolfe's eyelids drooped. "You must furnish me with a list of those so collected and discarded. Names, occupations, and any known temperaments." She opened her purse, pulled out a folded sheet, and handed it to me. 6 names. Dealers, artists, one former partner, and a housekeeper. She'd come prepared. I scanned it, whistled softly, and passed it along. "You might want to start alphabetically. That's a social hand grenade list if I've ever seen one." Wolfe unfolded it with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Indeed." Miss Telford leaned forward. "I can pay your usual fee, and I'll do whatever is necessary. I only ask that you find who did it before the police destroy his reputation. Inspector Kramer is already—" She stopped herself, but I caught the name. So did Wolfe. He sighed like a man remembering a chronic illness. "I see," he said. "Archie, contact Mr. Kramer and inform him we shall assist only inasmuch as decency permits." "Which means," I said, "I should brace for incoming thunder." "Precisely." Evelyn Telford rose. "You'll take the case, then." Wolfe's eyes lingered on the list, then on her. "Yes, Because your father's death, I suspect, was not an act of theft, but of judgment. And such matters, he added, interest me. She exhaled, half relief, half dread. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. As Fritz saw her out, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes again. Archie, fetch the file on art crimes of the past decade and have Saul Panzer prepare for inquiries at Madison Avenue. The collector's circle will be a kennel of resentments. Got it, I said. And should I also brace the storm door for Kramer? Do so, Wolfe murmured. He will arrive soon. When men of limited intellect suspect competence elsewhere, they become prompt. He wasn't wrong. The phone rang again before I'd even reached my desk. I reached for the receiver before it could finish its second ring. Kramer didn't bother with hello. His voice came through like gravel on a coffee grinder. You tell that fat orchid maniac of yours to keep his nose out of this one, Goodwin. Telford's murder is already wrapped in red tape and stupidity, and I don't need his brand of fertilizer. Inspector, I said, you're making me feel unwanted. We only just started taking an interest in your case. You might at least give us a warm-up lap before throwing rocks. I don't need your help, he said. But I need to know why Evelyn Telford ran to Wolfe instead of waiting for the police report. I leaned back, watching Wolfe pretend not to listen. Because maybe she likes orchids. Or maybe she thinks the department's been crossbreeding paperwork and incompetence again. Take your pick, he growled. She's hiding. Something. We found no forced entry, no sign of struggle. The gun was her father's. Registered. Clean. And that sculpture she says was stolen. Nobody's seen it, ever. Maybe it's a fairy tale. Then she's got imagination, I said. You might consider hiring her. It'd brighten homicide. Kramer's patience snapped. Goodwin, tell Wolfe I'll be at the brownstone in 15 minutes. If he's planning to interfere, I want him to do it to my face. The line went dead. I hung up, looked over, and saw Wolfe setting down his beer with exaggerated care. 15 minutes, I said. He's early, by your prediction. His irritation accelerated him, Wolfe replied. The human brain, when threatened with exposure, tends to substitute speed for thought. Fritz will bring him coffee. It will not help. Fritz appeared right on cue to collect the empty glass. Inspector Kramer again, sir, he asked in his polite battlefield tone. Indeed, Wolfe said. Prepare for noise. When the bell rang, I opened the door to find Kramer filling the frame like a storm cloud in a hat. He came in without invitation, eyes scanning for guilt like he expected it to hide behind the furniture. Where is she? He demanded. Gone, I said. Left 20 minutes ago. You just missed her dramatic exit. He scowled. Convenient. She's got a murdered father, I said. Convenience probably isn't her strong suit. Wolfe didn't rise. He gave Kramer a look that would have soured cream. Inspector, your persistence, though often misguided, is admirable. You've come to announce something? I've come to say stay out of it. The daughter's emotional, and she'll tell you stories you'll take for gospel. We're checking her alibi, and I don't want your interference muddying statements. Your concern, Wolfe said, for the integrity of falsehoods is touching. Kramer's face turned a deep red that could have registered as a warning light. You think she's innocent already? I think, Wolfe said evenly, that you are being predictable. A collector is murdered, a minor object is missing, and you prefer the simplest explanation. Theft. But theft without profit motive is not theft. It is theater. Kramer barked a laugh that wasn't cheerful. You got that from one phone call. You've forgotten what real police work looks like. I recall it vividly, Wolfe said. It involves men shouting in hallways, trampling evidence, and arresting the nearest relative to secure headlines. Shall I go on? Kramer jabbed a finger at him. One day your mouth is going to close on a subpoena. I anticipate the day with dread, Wolfe murmured. I stepped in before the air curdled completely. Inspector, If it's any comfort, Wolfe hasn't left his chair since you called. The only thing he's interfered with today is digestion. Don't be cute, Goodwin. He turned back to Wolfe. If you get anything at all, you bring it to me before you start handing out your sermons. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. If it is digestible, perhaps. Kramer left without a goodbye. The door shut hard enough to make the orchids tremble in their pots. Wolfe sighed, long and heavy. Archie, I will require complete dossiers on the 6 names Miss Telford provided. Saul shall inquire discreetly. Ori can handle the gossip at the galleries. You will visit the house. That's direct enough, I said. Any preferences on approach? Charm, intimidation, or my natural radiance? None, Wolfe said. Simply observe, there is a contradiction somewhere in that woman's account, and contradictions are the compost of murder. Nice motto, I said. I'll have it embroidered. I made a few calls. Saul first, who grunted his acceptance and hung up before I finished the address. Then Ori, who sounded pleased at the thought of sniffing around collectors with rich wives. By the time I left the house, the day had darkened to that dull gray New York specializes in. The Telford townhouse stood on Madison, tall, quiet, and the kind of rich that never felt the need to announce itself. A uniformed officer outside checked my credentials, then let me through with the expression of a man who doubted my existence. Inside, the place smelled faintly of oil paint and stale smoke. The study door was open. A forensics man crouched near the desk, dusting for prints that probably wouldn't talk. The carpet had been rolled back around a dark stain that didn't need a label. A lean man in a brown suit straightened up as I entered. Detective Pearlie Stebbins, Kramer's loyal bulldog and my occasional sparring partner. Goodwin, he said. Wolfe send you to second-guess us again. Not at all, I said. I came to admire your technique. I hear you've solved the case already. Don't push it, he said. You and your boss keep your noses clean. Miss Telford's upstairs with a doctor. She fainted once already. That's what grief does to people who don't have your charm, I said. He grunted and went back to his prints. I took a slow walk around the room. There was the empty pedestal, clean dust ring around it where something small had sat for years. On the wall above the fireplace hung an array of framed receipts and exhibition cards, art as documentation. On the desk, a silver frame showed Evelyn with a man I assumed was Telford, both smiling the brittle smiles of people who understand posing as a performance. I bent closer. Behind the frame, tucked under the edge, was a torn envelope. I eased it out with my pen. The letter inside was short, written in quick, nervous strokes. Sam, stop the sale. It's not yours to sell. If you go through with it, I'll make sure everyone knows. No signature. I slipped it into my pocket and turned as Stebbins's voice snapped, "Hey!" "Just picking up after you boys," I said smoothly. "Wouldn't want something delicate trampled." He frowned, but his hands were busy with powder. I left before he decided to change that. Outside, the sky had gone full slate, the city humming like a machine too tired to stop. I hailed a cab and gave the driver Wolfe's address. On the ride back, I turned the letter over in my hand. No date, no envelope markings. Someone close, someone nervous, someone who'd known Telford's habits. Wolfe was waiting in the office when I got in, the room warm and smelling faintly of beef consommé. "Well," he said without looking up from his book, "I have one unsigned letter, one missing statue, and one daughter who might be lying through a very controlled set of teeth." "That will suffice for a beginning," he said. "Dinner in 20 minutes. We'll discuss your findings afterward. Truth, Archie, has a curious appetite. It digests better after beef." I dropped the letter on his desk and watched his eyes move once, twice, narrowing slightly. "This," he murmured, "is interesting. The handwriting is male, and the tone, resentment disguised as principle. You can tell all that from one note. I asked. From one human, he corrected. The author believed himself wronged, not cheated. There is a difference. Tomorrow we shall discover which applies to Samuel Telford. I said, and tonight? He closed the book, eyes heavy but alive. Tonight, Archie, we digest. Fritz was already laying out the roast when Wolfe lifted his head from the letter. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a ship turning its bow, but I'd learned it meant the machinery inside had started humming. He pushed his plate forward and said, Archie, your supper can wait. Fetch the index, under Telford. I didn't need to ask which one. There's only one index that scares librarians and delights Wolfe. I crossed to the wall cabinet, slid open the drawer marked TV, and pulled out a card filed under Telford, Samuel Patron, Collection, Auction, 3 cross-references. Wolfe read it, grunted softly, and gestured for beer. Art auctions, he said between sips. The letter threatens disclosure of a sale. I wished to know what was being sold. I nodded. I can check the Gazette listings, but if this was private, we'll need someone who actually speaks fluent dealer. That means Lon Cohen, or maybe... He cut in. Not Lon. Call Mr. Parker Hastings. That name I knew. Hastings ran the Comedy Gallery uptown, one of those places where paintings hang like high priests and everyone whispers. I phoned. He wasn't pleased to hear from me, but perked up when I said Nero Wolfe was interested in Samuel Telford's current dealings. I shouldn't discuss private arrangements, he said, voice coated with the varnish of discretion. You shouldn't, I agreed, but you will, because if you don't, Wolfe will start talking about you to Inspector Kramer, and Kramer's a conversationalist who sweats. That did it. All right, but not on the phone. I'll come down first thing in the morning. I hung up and turned back. He's coming to us, which means he's got more to lose than just manners. Wolfe nodded. Very good. Now eat. You are unproductive when hungry. Dinner with Wolfe isn't just a meal. It's an institution. You don't talk business while Fritz's work is on the table unless the house is burning, and even then Wolfe would finish his dessert first. So we ate, in silence except for the sound of cutlery and Wolfe's occasional sighs of approval. When we finished, he leaned back, eyes half closed, fingers interlaced. Archie, the penitent statue, the missing object, describe precisely the pedestal on which it stood. It was clean, I said. Dust ring about 6 inches across, polished wood top, nothing else. Whoever took it didn't grab in a panic. They knew where it sat and wanted only that. Which implies, Wolfe said, familiarity. Either domestic access or frequent visitation. And the letter, unsigned, written in haste but not stupidity, an educated hand. You see the convergence? I see we've got one smart thief or one sentimental killer. He didn't smile. Emotion rarely writes in ink. It acts, it breaks, it bleeds. No, this was deliberate. The phone interrupted him. Fritz answered, listened, and handed it to me. For you, Archie. A man who says he doesn't give his name to hired help. I took it. This is Goodwin. What kind of hired help did you have in mind? The voice was male, rough silk, maybe 40s. Tell Wolfe to stop sniffing around Telford's affairs. Collectors die every day. Some of them deserve it. Generous of you to judge, I said. You have a name to go with the sermon? He chuckled. Names are for tombstones. Tell Wolfe to forget the penitent. It's cursed. Then he hung up. I gave Wolfe the summary in one neat paragraph. He listened, eyes narrowing only once, at the word penitent. That, he said, is the second time tonight I've heard that statue invoked as though it were a personality. You think the statue's the key? I think, he said, it's the handle by which we will open the door. No sane man commits murder for a myth unless it conceals something tangible. Perhaps a document, perhaps evidence. Hidden inside the bronze? Possibly. You will ascertain. Sure, I said. I'll just stroll into a homicide scene with a screwdriver. You will use your brain, not your tools, he said coldly. Return to the house tomorrow. Obtain a photograph of the statue from Miss Telford if she has one. If not, find an artist who recalls it. Meanwhile, we will see Mr. Hastings at 10. I took that as a dismissal and went upstairs. The evening passed quietly, except for the faint sound of Wolfe dictating notes to himself. Latin names of orchids punctuating words like theft, pride, and atonement. When he does that, I know the engine's really turning. The next morning, Fritz had coffee on before I was fully awake. Wolfe was already in the office, in his yellow pajamas and robe, scanning the newspaper as though it had personally offended him. Anything? I asked. No public notice of the murder yet, he said. Kramer is suppressing it until he finds a narrative less humiliating to the department. Good. That gives us a head start. At 10 sharp, Parker Hastings arrived. Thin, dapper, nervous enough to unbutton and rebutton his gloves twice before Fritz even took his coat. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. Mr. Hastings, he said, I appreciate your promptness. Sit. The man did, perching like a bird, expecting the cat to speak. Mr. Wolfe, I must insist this conversation remain confidential. Mr. Telford was arranging to liquidate part of his collection through my gallery. Strictly private sale. Some pieces had provenance complications. Meaning, Wolfe said, they were stolen before they were sold. Hastings winced. I wouldn't say that. I just did, Wolfe said. Continue. Telford had a small bronze, a Renaissance piece, unrecorded, unsigned. He hinted it came from an ecclesiastical source in Rome. He wanted it sold discreetly to a private European buyer. I refused without documentation. He became furious. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't seen him since. Describe the buyer, Wolfe said. Hastings hesitated. A Mr. Leonard Vale, English. I never met him, only received letters through a broker. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. You will send copies of those letters to my office immediately. I don't know if that's proper. Then improper, Wolfe interrupted. But you will do it. You may go. The man rose, relief and fear in equal measure. I showed him out, and when I came back, Wolfe was staring at nothing, lips pressed tight. Vale, he said softly. A false name. Common enough, but the geography interests me. Rome, ecclesiastical, a penitent in bronze. Archie, have you ever considered how art imitates confession? I prefer my confessions without sculptors. He ignored that. If Telford acquired the piece illegally, the letter writer could have been a partner. Blackmail, moral outrage, both lead to threats. The daughter may not have told us everything. She seemed pretty straightforward. Then she's either innocent or trained. You will visit her again this afternoon. Observe, listen, and, if possible, rattle. I was hoping you'd say that, I said. She rattles nicely. He closed his eyes, exhaled through his nose. Archie, your levity is corrosive. Keep it to yourself. Sure, I said, but it's part of my charm package. You wouldn't hire me without it. I grabbed my hat, notebook, and what remained of my optimism, and headed out. The day had warmed slightly, the city sweating under its own noise. I reached Madison around noon. A maid with tragic posture let me in. Miss Telford was in the parlor, pale but precise, a cup of tea untouched before her. She looked up as I entered. Mr. Goodwin, I thought perhaps Mr. Wolfe had changed his mind. Not yet, I said. But he might if I don't bring him something useful. I need a picture of the penitent. Do you have one? She nodded, went to a drawer and returned with a black and white photograph. The statue was smaller than I'd imagined, Delicate, detailed, a man on his knees with wrists bound, expression somewhere between agony and relief. "Pretty thing," I said. "Do you know where your father bought it?" "In Rome, years ago. He said it came from a monastery. I never liked it. He kept it in his study as though it accused him." "Accused him of what?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around the photo. "My father wasn't kind. He collected people. Sometimes he broke them. Maybe someone finally broke back." There it was, the kind of line Wolfe calls the human hinge. I studied her, noting the tremor she tried to hide, the effort of control. "You had an argument with him?" "No." Her eyes met mine, steady. We hadn't spoken in 3 days. He was angry because I refused to attend a dinner for that dealer, Mr. Hastings. "Interesting coincidence," I said. "He'll be thrilled to hear your name again." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe fear. "You've spoken to him?" "I have that privilege. He mentioned a private sale your father was arranging. Did you know about it?" "No," she said quickly. "He never told me what he sold. Only what he wanted me to believe he owned." I pocketed the photograph. "Thanks. Wolfe will appreciate the visual aid." As I turned to leave, she said softly, "Mr. Goodwin, do you believe the statue could have cursed him?" "Lady," I said, "if bronze could curse, half the city's fountains would be in jail." Her smile was small and frightened. "Then find the one who did. Please." I promised nothing. On the sidewalk outside, the air smelled like summer rain about to start trouble. I hailed a cab, headed back to the brownstone, and couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in that neat voice of hers was the sound of guilt rehearsed too well. Wolfe didn't even wait for me to take off my hat. He held up a hand, palm outward, eyes on the photograph I'd barely pulled from my pocket. "Give it here, Archie." He took it delicately, like a priest handling a relic, and set it under the lamp on his desk. The light caught the grey sheen of the figure, the kneeling man, wrists bound, face hidden under shadow. Wolfe stared at it for a full minute without a word. Then he said, "Observe the hands." "I'm observing. They're tied." "Not merely tied," he murmured. "They are crossed in the wrong order. The sculptor intended to suggest restraint, but look closer. The right hand is over the left. Symbolically, that indicates self-imposed confinement. A penitent binding himself." "Maybe the artist ran out of models," I said. He ignored me. This was not crafted as decoration. It was testimony. "Whose testimony?" He didn't answer. He leaned back and folded his arms. "Archie, the daughter lied. That's getting to be a hobby of yours, accusing people who hire us." "She lied," he repeated, "because she omitted something, the dinner she refused to attend." With Hastings. That was no social function. Her father was using her presence as a guarantee of his credibility. When she declined, the sale faltered. He became desperate. Desperate enough to sell to the wrong customer? Precisely. And that wrong customer, Mr. Leonard Vale, is not English, nor fictitious in the sense Hastings imagines. He exists, but under a different name. "You've got a candidate?" "I have an intuition," Wolfe said, which in my case is merely evidence unarranged. "Kramer will arrive before long. He always does when he thinks I'm a step ahead. Until then, get Saul on the phone. I want every record of a Leonard Vale entering or leaving this country in the past month." I called Saul and gave him the instructions. Wolfe, meanwhile, poured himself another beer, a sure sign the theory train was gaining steam. He sipped, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Archie," he said, "what do you recall of the letter you found?" "The part that said, 'It's not yours to sell,' which could mean the statue, the secret inside it, or the Brooklyn Bridge for all we know." He nodded. "The phrasing is religious, not proprietary. It implies something sacred, violated by commerce. That statue once belonged to the church, and Telford stole it." Then somebody righteous decided to balance the scales. Or fearful, he said softly. Fear masquerading as righteousness is a potent motive. The doorbell interrupted him. Fritz's footsteps crossed the hall, followed by the unmistakable voice of Inspector Kramer, still raw from its morning cigar. He came in red-faced, rumpled, and radiating suspicion. You've been busy, Wolfe, talking to gallery men, collectors, the daughter. Pretty soon you'll be running your own precinct. Wolfe didn't rise. You may sit, Inspector. You're always more tolerable seated. Kramer ignored the chair. We found powder residue on the study desk. Someone fired the gun from close range, probably across it. The daughter says she was upstairs, but the maid swears she heard voices. 2 men, not 1. No sign of forced entry. Then you have no progress, Wolfe said. Only contradictions. I've got progress, Kramer snapped. Telford's safe was open. Empty. You know what was in it? A receipt from the Carmody Gallery and a half-burned check made out to cash for $10,000. No note, no explanation. That, Wolfe said, is progress only if you think thieves bank openly. Don't get clever. What's this I hear about a statue? The penitent, I said. Bronze. Missing. Probably hollow. Hollow? Kramer frowned. You're saying there was something inside? I'm saying Wolfe thinks so. Wolfe finally lifted his gaze to meet the inspector's. Mr. Telford trafficked in stolen ecclesiastical art. He was arranging to sell this piece to an intermediary. The letter found by Mr. Goodwin proves there was opposition to the sale, likely from a person connected with its origin. That opposition escalated to murder. Fine, Kramer said. Then give me a name. If I had one, Wolfe replied, you would already be irrelevant. Kramer's jaw worked. You know, someday— Yes, Wolfe interrupted, waving a hand. You will have my license revoked, my orchids confiscated, and my cook deported. In the meantime, bring me a list of known art dealers under investigation by customs for smuggling from Italy. I'm not your errand boy. Then leave, Wolfe said, turning back to the photograph. Kramer glared, decided he wasn't winning, and stomped out. The door shut like a slammed file drawer. Wolfe sighed. Men like him, he said, are proof that energy without intellect is mere noise. He's got one advantage over you, I said. He can arrest people. So can a hurricane, Wolfe said, but only I can identify them. The phone rang before I could reply. Saul's voice came through, steady and precise. Archie, I got something. There's a Leonard Vale listed on a manifest from Naples last week. British passport, but the number matches a forgery batch Interpol flagged 2 months ago. He's staying at the Astoria under the name Leonard V. Harris. Good work, I said. Any description? Tall, mid-40s, grey hair, scar near his temple. And get this, he registered the day before Telford was shot. That was all Wolfe needed. His eyes brightened the way other men's do over prize money. Archie, he said, we will see Mr. Vale, or Mr. Harris. This evening, you will telephone him now. And say what? That Nero Wolfe wishes to purchase a piece of art he recently acquired under unfortunate circumstances. I grinned. That should get him curious. It did. I made the call, introduced myself, and passed on Wolfe's message. There was a pause, then a smooth English voice. Tell Mr. Wolfe curiosity is dangerous. But I'll indulge him. 8 o'clock. When I hung up, Wolfe was already ringing for Fritz. Dinner early, he said. We have company afterward. He spent the next hour in silence, eyes half closed, mind ticking like a well-fed metronome. At 8 sharp, Fritz opened the door to a man exactly as described, tall, lean, with the sort of face that could sell insurance or commit murder, depending on the light. Mr. Harris, I said, come in. He gave a faint smile. Mr. Goodwin, isn't it? I expected more hostility. Hostilities for amateurs. Wolfe's the professional. He stepped into the office. Wolfe didn't rise, but his gaze was surgical. "Mr. Vale," he said quietly. The man froze. "I beg your pardon." "Spare me," Wolfe said. "Forged passports are like forged paintings. They reveal their maker. Sit down." Vale, or Harris, did, with the faint amusement of a man who likes testing cages. "You're bold, Mr. Wolfe. Perhaps too bold. You think I killed Telford?" "I think," Wolfe said, "you're the only person in New York who understands why the penitent vanished." The man's fingers drummed the armrest. "You think it was stolen for profit?" "No," Wolfe said. "It was reclaimed." The amusement faded. "You know nothing about it." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "I know the statue was hollow. I know it concealed something Telford intended to sell, something you came here to prevent him from selling. You confronted him. He refused. The gun was his, but the impulse was yours." Vale's jaw tightened. "You have imagination, Mr. Wolfe, but no proof." "Proof is for courtrooms," Wolfe said. "I deal in certainties. Tell me what the statue contained." He hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, "A confession, written by a priest before his death, implicating men still alive in Rome. If it had been sold, lives would have ended. I came to buy it back, not to kill." "And yet Telford died," Wolfe said softly. Vale rose, face pale. "He was alive when I left." I stepped between them before tension decided to find a gun. Wolfe raised a hand. "Sit down, Archie. Mr. Vale, you will remain available. I expect confirmation of your story from Rome within 24 hours. Do not leave your hotel." Vale's mouth twitched in a half-smile. "You won't call the police?" "If I did," Wolfe said, "they would spoil my dinner. Go." The door shut behind him, and Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "Well," I said, "we've got a living confession and a dead collector. What's next?" He glanced at the photograph again. "Next, Archie, we identify which of the living finds absolution hardest to bear." Wolfe's eyes stayed on the photograph long after Vale's footsteps had faded down the hall. I could tell from the way his mouth compressed that the man's story hadn't satisfied him. He finally said, "Archie, I dislike mysteries that come wrapped in piety. When a man speaks of confession and redemption, he usually means concealment and guilt." "Which one fits Vale?" I asked. "Both," Wolfe said. "He's protecting someone. Possibly himself, but not primarily. There's a tremor of reverence in his voice when he speaks of the priest's confession. Men don't revere their own lies." I leaned against the desk. "Then maybe he's telling the truth." "That is worse," Wolfe said. "Truth is rarely convenient to anyone involved, especially the innocent." The phone rang before I could reply. I picked it up. It was Saul again, efficient as ever. "Archie, your English friend checked out of the Astoria 10 minutes ago, left his luggage behind, paid cash for the room, and walked out without a word." I frowned. "You followed?" "I tried, lost him near 45th. He knew he was being tailed." I relayed the news. Wolfe's brows lowered, the way clouds do before thunder. "He will go to the source," he said. "Men who flee don't run from the scene, they return to it. You will intercept him at the Telford townhouse." "Without an invitation?" "With my blessing," he said. "Take Fred Durkin with you. You may require discouragement." I phoned Fred, grabbed my hat and revolver, and made it to Madison within 20 minutes. The police tape was still across the front door, but someone had already pushed it aside. I stepped inside and heard footsteps above. Fred went up first. We found Vale in the study, standing where the pedestal had been, his head bowed as though in prayer. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. He turned, calm but cornered. "Ah, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "You're punctual. I aim to please. Wolfe said you'd come back for something. You mind telling me what?" He smiled faintly. "Only what was left behind." Fred moved a step closer. Mind showing us? Vale reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You can tell Wolfe I've delivered it. Delivered what? I asked. The rest of the confession. He dropped it on the desk and before I could move, stepped backward toward the open window. Fred lunged, but the man was fast. He vaulted over the sill, landing hard on the awning below, and vanished into the street. By the time we reached the pavement, he was gone in the crowd. Fred swore softly. He's got legs for a preacher. I pocketed the paper. Let's see what his gospel says. We drove back to the brownstone and found Wolfe exactly as expected, unmoved, unreadable, and already impatient. I handed him the paper. He unfolded it and read silently while I poured coffee. The words were brief, jagged, written in the same hand as the letter I'd found at the townhouse. It read, "Forgive me. The sin was theft, not faith. I took what was never mine, and now I cannot give it back. The bronze hides what I confessed. Burn it." Wolfe read it twice, then said quietly, "This was written by Father Anselmo." "Who's he?" "A Jesuit scholar who disappeared in 1939, Wolfe said. "He was accused of smuggling relics out of Italy during the war. His name appeared in a Vatican circular, Oisu, read some years ago. If this is genuine, Telford's statue concealed his written confession, perhaps evidence of his complicity or exoneration. And Vale wanted to destroy it before it surfaced? Or protect someone who would be ruined by it," Wolfe said. Telford, on the other hand, saw only the chance for profit. It would explain why the daughter feared scandal more than justice. "You're saying she knew about it?" "I'm saying she suspected," Wolfe said. Her reaction was too practiced. She believed her father had brought something cursed into their lives, not by superstition but memory. I leaned on the desk. If that confession's what Vale was after, why didn't he just take the statue? Why kill Telford? "Perhaps he didn't," Wolfe said. "You and Fred found no weapon on him, no panic. His behavior was consistent with guiltless desperation. Then who did it?" He tapped the paper. "Someone who understood what this confession meant and feared exposure. Archie, call Miss Telford. Invite her here, politely but firmly. She must come at once." When she arrived half an hour later, she looked more composed than she had any right to. Grief had given her poise instead of collapse, which made me uneasy. Wolfe motioned for her to sit, and when she did, he pushed the paper across the desk. She glanced at it, pale but steady. "Where did you get this?" "From the man who claims he came to recover the statue for the church," Wolfe said. "You know him as Leonard Vale." Her fingers tightened on her purse. "Then he lied. My father didn't steal from the church. He bought the statue legitimately." "From whom?" Wolfe asked. She hesitated. "A man named Vincenzo, an Italian dealer. My father said he'd paid well for it." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Vincenzo what?" "I don't know. I never met him." "Convenient," Wolfe said. "Miss Telford, I'm not a priest. Do not confess to me by omission. Did your father ever mention Father Anselmo?" Her lips parted, then closed again. "No." "Miss Telford," he said softly, "you are an intelligent woman. Your father's death was not the act of a burglar. The gun was his own. The safe was empty. The statue gone. Tell me, did you know what was inside it?" She looked from him to me, and something cracked behind her eyes. "I only knew there were papers. I didn't know what they said. My father told me once that the statue contained insurance. He said if anything happened to him, the world would hear the truth about certain men. I thought he was bluffing." "Who were these men?" Wolfe asked. She shook her head. "He never said." I said, "Then Vale was telling the truth. He wanted to keep the confession buried." She looked stricken. "Then he killed my father." "No," Wolfe said. "Vale had reason to retrieve the statue intact. Whoever shot your father wanted the contents destroyed. And you, Miss Telford, are the only one who could enter that room without question." She stood abruptly. That's absurd. Sit down, Wolfe said. And she did, almost without choice. You found the papers missing from the safe, saw what they implied, and realized your father's sins would taint you as well. You confronted him. There was a struggle. Perhaps accidental, perhaps not. You removed the statue afterward to finish what he began. Destruction. Her hands were trembling. You have no proof. On the contrary, Wolfe said, your father's photograph. The dust on the pedestal does not match the rest of the room. You moved it after his death, not before. You hoped to destroy the evidence before the police arrived, but someone interrupted you. Who? She stared at him, then whispered, Vale. Of course, Wolfe said. He caught you with the statue, took it from you and fled. He believed he was saving souls. You believed you were saving face. Both of you failed. The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock. Finally, she said, if I did what you say, it wasn't murder. It was mercy. Wolfe closed his eyes. That, Miss Telford, is a distinction for philosophers. For the law, it is motive. Her voice broke. What will you do? I shall tell Inspector Kramer, he said. He will do what he always does, loudly. But first, Fritz will bring you water. You look unwell. I escorted her to the front room while Fritz fetched the glass. When I came back, Wolfe was staring at the letter again, fingers tapping the desk. Archie, he said, send Saul to find Vale. He will need protection from his own virtue. Sure, I said quietly. And what about her? Wolfe didn't look up. Her penance has already begun. Fritz had barely set down the glass when Kramer came through the front door without knocking. His expression said he'd smelled smoke and wanted to find who struck the match. I met him halfway across the office, but he brushed past like I was part of the furniture. All right, Wolfe, he barked. What the hell's this I hear about your boy dragging Miss Telford in here without notifying me first? She came voluntarily, Wolfe said, not looking up from the desk. You might call that civic initiative. Yeah? Well, I call it interference. He threw his hat onto the table and glared at both of us. You think you're going to run your own trial in here? No, Wolfe said calmly. I merely conduct the prelude. The law arrives for the finale. Kramer snorted. Cut the fancy talk. I got reports you found another letter. Let's see it. I handed him the folded sheet Vale had dropped in the study. He read it, lips moving, then frowned. You trying to tell me this was written by a priest? You've been sniffing too much orchid dust? This doesn't prove squat. It proves motive, Wolfe said. Mr. Telford's death was not the result of theft, but of fear. Fear that this confession would reach daylight. Fear from who? His daughter, Wolfe said. That got Kramer's full attention. What? She confronted him the night of his death. The statue was moved after he was shot. She admitted as much. Kramer's head turned toward me. You get that on record? In Wolfe's memory, I said. That's as solid as tape. Wolfe folded his hands. Inspector, I suggest you verify it quietly. Arrest her now and she will retract under pressure. Let her believe she's safe. Then confirm with the forensics on the dust and the pedestal. The truth will meet you halfway. Kramer stared at him for a long moment, chewing it over. You're sure of this? As sure as I am of your blood pressure, Wolfe said. Kramer grunted, jammed his hat back on, and muttered something unfit for orchids before heading out. The door slammed, and the silence afterward felt thick enough to chew. I said, You really think she pulled the trigger? Wolfe's eyes half closed. I think she ended a pattern her father began. It is a kind of symmetry men find irresistible. Sounds poetic for murder. Poetry and murder share a rhythm, he said. Both depend on timing. The phone rang again. Saul, this time. His voice was low, cautious. Archie, found Vale. He's at St. Veronica's Hospital on 12th. Somebody clipped him. Nothing fatal, a flesh wound. He says he was shot at near the river. Any guess by who? Didn't see. Wants to talk to Wolfe. I covered the receiver. Our confessor's been perforated. Wolfe sighed. Fetch him. That was easier said than done. Vale wasn't on the visitors list when I reached the hospital, and the nurse at the desk looked like she'd been trained by the Treasury Department. It took a phone call from Wolfe himself before she relented. Vale was in a private room, arm bandaged, face pale but composed. He looked up at me with faint amusement. You work fast, Mr. Goodwin. I was beginning to think you'd left me to the saints. Wolfe doesn't do charity work, I said. Who shot you? I didn't see. I heard a car behind me. Footsteps, then pain. I assume it was someone who wanted to make certain Father Anselmo's confession stayed buried. Like Miss Telford. His eyes flicked up sharply. No, she doesn't have it in her. Whatever else she did, she's no killer. I studied him. Then who? He hesitated. There's one more name. The dealer, Vincenzo. He sold Telford the statue, but Vincenzo wasn't a dealer. He was Anselmo's assistant. He fled Rome after the priest's death and reinvented himself here. If he feared discovery, he'd silence anyone who could connect him. That landed neatly on the open page of Wolfe's suspicions. I phoned the brownstone, relayed it, and got back a single word in reply. Bring him. Vale wasn't thrilled about travel, but he let me help him into a cab. When we arrived, Wolfe had cleared the desk and was waiting, chair turned slightly toward the fire, like a judge ready for closing arguments. Mr. Vale, he said, you may sit. The bullet in your arm. Where did it enter? Here, Vale said, touching the sleeve. From behind. Good. It confirms Miss Telford's innocence. She was here, under surveillance. That leaves your Vincenzo, I said. Wolfe nodded. Yes, and I think we already know him by another name. He opened the drawer, withdrew the gallery receipt Kramer had mentioned, and placed it flat on the desk. Carmody Gallery, Parker Hastings. Notice the signature on the bottom, P. Hastings, V. A common practice when partners share credit. The V stands for Vincenzo. Vale leaned forward, startled. You're certain? I'm never certain, Wolfe said, but I'm rarely mistaken. I said, so Hastings sold Telford the statue and tried to buy it back with bullets? Precisely. The man masquerades as a dealer, but trades in sanctity and scandal. He arranged the sale, realized too late what Telford possessed, and feared exposure. When Telford refused to cooperate, Hastings shot him. Vale's arrival disrupted his cleanup. That's pretty airtight, I said. Except for proof. Proof, Wolfe said, requires prompting. Mr. Vale, you will telephone Hastings. Tell him you retrieved the statue and are willing to meet. For payment, we shall listen. Vale hesitated only a second before taking the receiver. His voice went smooth, controlled. Parker, it's Leonard. I have it. No, not over the phone. Your gallery, midnight. He hung up and exhaled. He agreed. Wolfe's mouth curved slightly. Of course he did. Guilt is the most punctual of motives. We didn't wait till midnight. At 11:30, Fred Durkin and I were parked across the street from the Carmody Gallery, lights off, rain tapping steady on the windshield. The place was dark except for a faint glow in the back room. At 12 sharp, a car pulled up. Hastings stepped out, hat low, coat collar up, moving like a man who practiced caution for a living. He unlocked the gallery door and slipped inside. Vale sat beside me, tense. He expects me alone. That's the idea, I said. Stay put. I crossed the street quietly, gun ready, and eased through the unlocked door. The back room smelled of turpentine and cold marble. Hastings stood at the work table, pulling open a drawer. The glint of metal caught the lamplight. A revolver. Lose something? I said. He spun, eyes wide. Goodwin. What? Wolfe's regards, I said. He lunged for the gun, but I was faster. The shot went into the ceiling. My fist went into his jaw. He dropped like art at auction. Fred and Vale came in a minute later. I flipped Hastings onto his back and saw a small cloth-wrapped bundle in the open drawer. The statue, the penitent, cracked along its side. Inside the fissure were fragments of paper darkened with age. Vale knelt beside it, touched the bronze gently. He did try to burn it, I said, and missed his chance. Fred whistled softly. Guess we'd better call Kramer. Yeah, I said, but let Wolfe have his encore first. By the time we got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with his third beer. I dropped the broken statue on the desk, the papers still inside. He peered at it with something close to satisfaction. An appropriate conclusion, he said. The penitent punished by his own symbol. Meaning Hastings. Meaning all of them, he said. Each sought absolution and found exposure instead. Even Miss Telford, whose silence served vanity more than virtue. Only Mr. Vale acted from conscience. Vale looked tired but relieved. Then you'll tell the police the truth? Wolfe inclined his head. I shall tell them what they are capable of understanding. The rest belongs to confession. Wolfe studied the fragments inside the cracked bronze with something close to reverence, though he'd deny it if accused. He motioned me closer. Handle them carefully. Age has made them brittle, and ignorance would finish the job. I used a pair of tweezers from the drawer and lifted the top sheet. The ink had faded to the color of weak coffee, the handwriting narrow and tight. Latin, naturally. I could make out only a few words. Peccavi, venditus, deus. Wolfe's fingers twitched, an uncharacteristic sign of eagerness. Archie, he said, phone Dr. Theodore Morrow at Columbia. He owes me a favor from 1947. Tell him I require immediate translation. Confidential. I dialed. Morrow answered on the second ring, groggy but obedient. When I mentioned Wolfe's name, he agreed to come at once, proving that debt really is the most efficient currency. Wolfe sat back, eyes half closed, while I resealed the fragments in an envelope. Vale sat quietly across from us, one arm cradled against his chest. You believe those papers will clear me? They may clear everyone, Wolfe said. Or damn them all. Confessions have a democratic quality. No one escapes unscathed. Fritz appeared with fresh beer just as the doorbell rang again. Morrow entered, a small man with a large head and the kind of spectacles that make scholars look perpetually startled. He nodded curtly at me, bowed slightly to Wolfe, and settled by the desk with the envelope. It's genuine, he said after one glance. 16th century Italian, ecclesiastical Latin. Let me see. He bent over the text, murmuring translations under his breath. Wolfe waited, silent as a gargoyle. At last, Morrow straightened, pale with something that looked like awe. This isn't a confession of sin. It's an account, a record of relics removed from the Vatican treasury during the French occupation. The priest wrote that he hid evidence of the theft in a small statue, the penitent. He names the accomplices, 3 cardinals, 2 still alive when this was written. Wolfe's eyelids twitched. Names? Morrow hesitated. One was Vincenzo di Castagna. Vale leaned forward sharply. That's Hastings's real name. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. Mr. Hastings was the acolyte, not the dealer. He fled Italy after the scandal, assumed an alias, and resumed commerce in the very spoils he helped conceal. Morrow nodded, fascinated. If this document were made public, it would cause enormous embarrassment even now. Then we shall not make it public, Wolfe said. The church will prefer discretion, and I am happy to indulge them for a fee. I said, You're going to sell it back. Return it, Archie, he corrected. For proper custody, virtue must occasionally be profitable. Vale exhaled, half relief, half weariness. Then I'm free. Wolfe gave him a slow look. Free is a relative term. You acted without malice, which spares you the law. It does not absolve the burden of conscience. Before Vale could answer, the phone shrilled again. I grabbed it. Kramer's voice came through, rough and too pleased. We picked up Hastings at the gallery. Your boy left him cold on the floor, but not cold enough. He's talking, says Telford found out who he really was and tried to blackmail him. Claims the gun went off by accident. Sure, I said, and next he'll say he was polishing it for the customer. Save the jokes, Kramer growled. Tell Wolfe the case is closed, at least on paper, but I still want to know how he knew it was Hastings before I did. You'll have to wait for the memoir, I said and hung up. Wolfe opened his eyes. Inspector Kramer should never gamble. His curiosity is terminal. Then we're done? I asked. Almost. Mr. Vale, you will remain in New York until arrangements are complete. Fritz will see you fed. Dr. Morrow, I will have the translation typed and sealed by morning. You may deliver it to your bishop with my compliments and an invoice for $5,000. Morrow blinked. 5,000. Knowledge, Wolfe said, is never cheap. When they'd both gone, I stretched in my chair. Not bad. A stolen confession, a dead collector, and a penitent priest. You could turn it into scripture. He gave me a thin smile. Blasphemy is your most consistent talent. Consistency's part of the charm, I said. But there's still one thing that doesn't sit right. Miss Telford, do you really think she didn't pull the trigger? No, he said quietly. I think she did not need to. Her father's heart had already ceased its function the moment he bartered his soul. Hastings merely supplied the punctuation. Poetic again. Justice, Wolfe said, is poetry disguised as arithmetic. He leaned back, reached for his beer, and closed his eyes. I turned off the desk lamp, letting the fire paint the room in slow amber strokes. Outside, rain tapped the windows like a tired messenger. Fritz's voice came softly from the doorway. Shall I clear the desk, sir? No, Wolfe murmured. Leave it. The penitent may rest here until morning. I took that as my cue to call it a night. The office was warm, the smell of orchids drifting faintly through the vents. Wolfe's silhouette stayed still, huge and unmoving as if carved in thought. Walking upstairs, I couldn't help thinking that in this house, guilt didn't vanish. It just learned to behave. The rain hadn't stopped when I came back down. Wolfe hadn't moved an inch. He could have passed for a statue himself if the faint glint of his eyes hadn't given him away. He was still staring at the cracked bronze on the desk, as if daring it to confess something it hadn't already written 600 years ago. Archie, he said without looking up, the papers we recovered from the penitent, do you recall how they were folded? Sure, once lengthwise, twice cross. Why? He finally lifted his gaze. That was not how one would conceal parchment in bronze. Someone handled them recently. You mean Hastings? Perhaps. Or someone else entirely. His fingers tapped the edge of the desk. Fetch the envelope. There is an odor. I opened it and caught it too. A faint scent of smoke and turpentine. You thinking forgery? Forgery requires creation, Wolfe said. This is substitution. The true confession was burned, and what we found is its decoy. I blinked. Hold on. You're saying Morrow translated the wrong document? I'm saying he translated the document Hastings wanted him to see. The idea slid into place like a key. Then Hastings wasn't protecting his past. He was finishing his cleanup. Precisely, Wolfe said. And since his arrest, someone else has continued the task. The phone rang again, a sound so punctual it made Fritz pause at the kitchen door. I answered. It was Saul, voice low and tight. Archie, I tailed that nurse from the hospital, the one who bandaged Vale. She just met a man near Lexington, gave him an envelope, took cash, and hopped into a cab. I got the number. Describe the man. Tall, grey suit, hat brimmed down. Could have been anyone. Except he had a limp. I hung up and looked at Wolfe. Grey suit, limp, paid for an envelope. You want to place a bet? No, he said. Fetch Vale. I found Vale in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed with his good arm resting on his knee. His expression said he already knew the news before I spoke. He's not dead, I said, but he's clever. Hastings planted a copy and burned the real confession. Whoever he was working with finished the job. Vale rose slowly. He wasn't working alone. There was someone from the gallery who handled his private accounts. You've got a name. He hesitated. Clara Densmore. She managed his sales. I warned her not to. Save it for Wolfe, I said. He's got the sermon ready. When we entered the office, Wolfe didn't look up. Mr. Vale, you have withheld a detail essential to my digestion. I thought she was irrelevant, Vale said. Clara only handled paperwork. She knew nothing of the statue. Wolfe's tone was as soft as it ever got, which meant dangerous. Ignorance is never innocent when money is involved. You said Hastings sold through intermediaries. Miss Densmore was one. She is the one who forged the replacement and arranged its delivery to you at the gallery. You never wondered why she appeared so suddenly in Hastings' employ? Vale stiffened. You can't know that. I can because Hastings was incapable of legible Latin, and the handwriting on the forged parchment is feminine. I said, so she's our clean-up crew. Wolfe nodded. And she will not stop. She believes there is another copy hidden elsewhere, perhaps among Telford's papers. We must intercept her before she confirms or destroys it. Any idea where she might look? I asked. She will return to the scene she trusts most, her place of business. The gallery, I said. Of course. Wolfe waved a hand. Go, take Fred. If she arrives, persuade her that discretion is unprofitable. We were back on Madison within 20 minutes. The rain had thinned to a steady drizzle that made the city smell like wet stone and bad secrets. The Carmody Gallery sat dark, a single light glowing in the rear. Fred pointed. Someone's there. We moved quietly along the alley and slipped through the side door I'd jimmied earlier. Inside, the air was damp and chemical. A shadow crossed the back room, slender, quick. I clicked my flashlight and caught her in the beam. Clara Densmore, mid-30s. Sharp face, eyes too steady for innocence. She froze but didn't flinch. You again. I suppose Hastings talked before you broke his jaw. He mumbled enough, I said. We're here for the original papers, the ones he burned or didn't. Her smile was thin. You're too late. They're gone. Fred stepped forward. Lady, don't make me dig through every drawer in this place. You won't find them. She lifted her handbag slightly, just enough to show the outline of something metallic. Move, and I shoot. Fred's hand twitched toward his coat, but I shook my head. Miss Densmore, that's a bad career choice. Better than prison, she said. Telford was blackmailing Hastings, yes, but not just about the statue. He had ledgers, accounts, a record of every piece smuggled in the last decade. Hastings trusted me to destroy them. I did. The church doesn't forgive commerce. I said, You burned the confession too? Her jaw tightened. It deserved to die. It named men still revered. You'd understand if you'd ever believed in anything. Fred shifted his weight, but before he could move, a voice from behind her cut the air. Put it down, Clara. Vale stepped from the doorway, face drawn, bandaged arm stiff. She turned, eyes wide. Leonard, don't. He shook his head. It's over. Hastings is finished. Wolfe has the police. Give it to me. For a second, I thought she would. Then her hand twitched. The gun came up, and the shot went off like thunder in a museum. Fred lunged. The bullet hit a marble bust and sent dust spraying across the room. She stumbled, lost her grip, and the gun clattered to the floor. Vale caught her arm. For a moment they just stared at each other, two ghosts who'd outlived the same secret. She whispered, "He promised me peace." Vale said quietly, "You mistook silence for peace." Her eyes closed and she sagged against him, sobbing once before he let her go. Fred scooped up the weapon and signaled the all clear. I exhaled and looked around. The smell of powder mixed with turpentine and guilt. That's one way to end a gallery show. Vale straightened. She didn't kill Telford. She only followed orders. "I know," I said, "but she's going to have to explain the encore to Kramer." When we brought her back to the brownstone, Wolfe was still at his desk, as immovable as ever. He listened to the summary without interruption, then rang for Fritz. "Inspector Kramer will be here within half an hour," he said. "Fritz, prepare beer for 4. Clara sat motionless, hands folded, eyes hollow. Wolfe regarded her with something that almost resembled pity. "Miss Densmore," he said, "you have the misfortune of loyalty misplaced. I doubt prison will reform you, but perhaps solitude will clarify the difference between secrecy and virtue." She didn't answer. Vale watched her, face unreadable. When Kramer arrived, thundering as advertised, Wolfe handed him the pistol and the translation, minus a few lines. "Enough to close your case," he said. "The rest belongs elsewhere." Kramer didn't argue. He left with his suspects, his satisfaction and his confusion intact. The house was quiet again. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing. "Archie, lock the safe. The past has an unpleasant habit of reappearing when left unattended." I did, and the door clicked shut on parchment, bronze, and one more round of human penance. Fritz closed the door softly behind Kramer, and for a long moment the only sound was the faint hiss from the fireplace. Wolfe leaned back, breathing through his nose, eyes half-lidded in the posture he uses when he's replaying a chess game no one else can see. I poured myself a coffee. "You could have told Kramer about the forged papers." "I could," Wolfe said. "But I dislike redundancy. The law arrests bodies. I prefer to arrest minds. Miss Densmore's guilt is already secured by her own conviction. You think she'll confess? She already has. By her silence. Words are only confirmations of what conscience has written." That was Wolfe's kind of theology, but I wasn't in the mood for a sermon. I perched on the corner of the desk. "And Vale, he looks like a man waiting for absolution from someone higher than Kramer." "Let him wait," Wolfe murmured. "He has earned the privilege of discomfort. Men who meddle with sacred things must endure the echo." There was a soft knock at the door. Fritz opened it to reveal Vale, hat in hand, shoulders hunched. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. Wolfe didn't lift his head. "Gratitude is premature. Your situation is unresolved." Vale stepped forward. "I'm not concerned with the law anymore. I only want to know what will become of the real confession, the one Hastings destroyed." "It no longer exists," Wolfe said. "Fire is the only censor that never forgets." Vale nodded slowly. "Then the past stays buried." "Only physically," Wolfe said. "Its moral weight persists. You might consider remaining in America. Rome is crowded with memory." Vale managed a thin smile. "And New York isn't." That got half a twitch from Wolfe's mouth. "At least here the ghosts keep their appointments." When Vale left, I turned to him. "You do realize you're letting a man who helped smuggle Vatican property walk out free?" "Not free," Wolfe said. "Merely unpursued. There's a difference." Before I could argue, the phone rang again. Fritz took it, listened, and passed it to me. "Goodwin," said Saul's voice, clipped. "One more wrinkle. A messenger tried to deliver a package to the gallery tonight, addressed to the curator. The police intercepted it. It contained ashes and a single medallion. Vatican crest, fresh burn marks. I relayed that to Wolfe. He listened without surprise. Ah, the penitent's relics complete their circle. You think Hastings mailed it before his arrest? Unlikely. Miss Densmore, more probably. Her final act of devotion, to destroy what remained. Penance expressed through ash. You're getting lyrical again, I said. Poetry, he replied, is often mistaken for sentiment. In truth, it is simply precision expressed beautifully. The fire cracked softly. He leaned forward, hands steepled, eyes glinting under the lamplight. Archie, record this. Samuel Telford, deceased. Cause, homicide born of greed and concealment. Culprits, Parker Hastings, also known as Vincenzo di Castagna, aided by Clara Dinsmore. Motives, fear and preservation. Secondary actors, Leonard Vale and Evelyn Telford, accessories only to ignorance. Disposition, concluded. I wrote it down because he expected me to, though the last word felt too neat for the tangle we'd waded through. Finished? I asked. He nodded. The world prefers its sins catalogued neatly. It reassures the innocent. Went to pour another coffee, but Fritz appeared again, this time with an envelope. Delivered just now, sir. No return address. I tore it open. Inside was a small piece of scorched bronze, the missing corner from the penitent's base, and a note in block handwriting. For what was hidden has been forgiven. I passed it to Wolfe. He examined the fragment briefly, then dropped it into the desk drawer and shut it with a soft click. Forgiveness, he said, is an overrated luxury, but it does tidy the paperwork. I couldn't help grinning. You sound almost charitable. Never that, he said, lifting his glass. But I appreciate closure, even when it arrives dressed as redemption. The fire hissed again. Rain pressed softly against the windows, and the smell of orchids drifted in from the next room. Wolfe raised his glass, drained it, and gave a satisfied grunt, the sound that means the case, in every sense, has been digested. I sat back, watching the last curl of smoke from the hearth fade into the ceiling. Another confession burned, another secret sealed, another murderer accounted for. In Nero Wolfe's world, justice didn't always come wearing handcuffs. It came in sentences, spoken quietly by a man who weighed truth like gold on a scale no court could afford. Wolfe didn't speak for a good half-minute, which meant his mind had already stepped 3 moves beyond mine. He was staring at the drawer that now held the bronze fragment, his fingers making slow, deliberate circles on the armrest of his chair. You notice, he said at last, the phrasing of the note, for what was hidden has been forgiven. That was not written by Miss Densmore, because she wouldn't know how to spell forgiven without choking on it. He ignored me. The handwriting, block capitals, careful spacing. It is the style of a man who conceals emotion behind formality, the sort used by clergymen accustomed to writing homilies for public notice boards. You're thinking Vale. I rarely think in categories as broad as people, he said, eyes narrowing. But yes, Vale. He was the only one with both motive and vocabulary. His role was not passive repentance. It was orchestration. He engineered everything that followed. I sat forward. Hold it. You're saying Vale planned Telford's murder? No, Wolfe said. He planned its inevitability. There is a distinction. He came here not to confess, but to measure success. That's a fancy way of saying he played us. Wolfe's mouth twisted. Precisely. I started to argue, but the front bell interrupted. Fritz reappeared, brows lifted slightly. Mr. Leonard Vale, sir. Wolfe gestured with the 2 fingers. Send him in. Vale entered, hat in hand again, face composed but taut. I owe you an apology, he said, and perhaps an explanation. Wolfe didn't move. Both are seldom genuine. But indulge yourself. Vale stepped closer, to the desk. You were right. I wrote the note, and I delivered the fragment. I wanted to close the circle, to make sure the church received what it deserved. Silence. Silence is not justice, Wolfe said. It is mercy, Vale countered. The men named in those papers are dead. The church has rebuilt. There's no need to exhume sin just to watch it rot again. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. You are lying. Hastings and Densmore were not preserving sanctity. They were preserving profit, and you, Mr. Vale, used faith as camouflage. Vale's voice dropped. You think I killed Telford? I think, Wolfe said, you lit the fuse and let him burn himself. You brought him the statue, fed his vanity, and waited for greed to do the rest. You needed him to expose Hastings, to flush out your fellow conspirators without revealing your own involvement. Only the result was more violent than you planned. Vale smiled faintly, and that was answer enough. I said, you really are a piece of work. You set up a murder to purify your conscience. Not to purify, he said quietly. To conclude. Wolfe leaned back. You misunderstand your own drama, sir. You are not the penitent. You are the penance itself. That silenced him. For a moment, the room felt airless. Then Wolfe's tone shifted, all chill logic again. The police will not charge you. You have made certain of that, but I have already called Inspector Kramer and suggested he confirm the source of the statue's bronze fragment. It was cast from a 19th century mold, too recent to contain a 16th century confession. Therefore, the real statue still exists. Vale's head jerked slightly. Impossible. On the contrary, Wolfe said, it is precisely what a perfectionist like you would do. Destroy the counterfeit, preserve the authentic. You hid it where sentiment would prevent discovery, somewhere sacred to you. Perhaps St. Veronica's Hospital, where you arranged your own conveniently public wounding. His voice had dropped almost to a whisper, which made it worse. A chapel, perhaps, behind plaster, in the alcove of a saint no one prays to anymore. Vale's face had gone completely still. I stood up. He's right, isn't he? He didn't answer. Wolfe sighed, a long exhale of finality. Archie, fetch the telephone. I moved toward it, but Vale raised a hand. No need. You've won. He turned to me, his eyes hollowed out by something older than guilt. Do you believe in forgiveness, Mr. Goodwin? I believe in evidence, I said. He nodded, almost kindly. Then I'll leave you both with that. He walked to the door. Fritz appeared in the hall, uncertain whether to block or bow. Wolfe gave a slight nod, and Vale disappeared into the rain. I stared after him. You're letting him go? I'm not the state, Wolfe said. My jurisdiction ends where stupidity begins. I shut the door. More forcefully than I meant to. You realize he'll hide it again, wherever it is. Of course, Wolfe said, and that is precisely where it belongs. Hidden things maintain equilibrium. Exposed, they invite crusades. That's the most cynical sermon I've heard this week. It is the only one worth hearing. He reached for his beer and poured it with ceremonial slowness. This case was never about art or faith or even murder. It was about possession. The one instinct man never evolves beyond. Every object, every person, every truth, once owned, always endangered. He sipped, then added, You may quote me, provided you spell it correctly. I sat again, the exhaustion settling in like old smoke. The fire had burned down to embers. So what's next? Another orchid delivery? Or should I start dusting the relics? He closed his eyes. Both in order. Fritz will prepare eggs. You will file the notes. And humanity, in its infinite perseverance, will continue sinning at a comfortable pace. That was Wolfe's version of closure. Dinner, paperwork, and philosophy. I couldn't argue. I locked the file, turned off the desk lamp, and took one last look at the drawer that held the bronze fragment. The faint smell of smoke still clung to it. Maybe forgiveness did too. Or maybe that was just the scent of another sinner getting away clean while Nero Wolfe leaned back and called it equilibrium. The sound of rain was still thudding against the window when Wolfe finally spoke again, low and almost reluctant. "Archie," he said, "there is one more task." I didn't like the tone. It had the same weight as those moments when he's figured out something that can't be undone but insists we wade through it anyway. I was hoping the task involved a chair, a drink, and unconsciousness, I said. He didn't even glance at me. There is unfinished business. The letter fragment, the one in block print, was not the only message delivered tonight. That made me look up. "You've been holding out?" "Not holding out," he said, reaching into the inside pocket of his robe. "Merely reserving." He produced a smaller envelope, unsealed, edges damp from the humidity. The handwriting was again Vale's, but this time it wasn't disguised in capitals. "This was placed under the door before you returned. Fritz found it." I took it and unfolded the paper. It contained just 8 words, written in a quick, steady hand. "Seek the altar, and you will see him." "Well," I said, "either that's poetry or directions." "Both," Wolfe said. "Mr. Vale could never resist the urge to moralize even when confessing. The altar refers, of course, to St. Veronica's hospital." "He's going back there." "Not going," Wolfe said, rising slowly from his chair, always a sight that means the world has shifted. "He never left. He told you he was wounded near the river, but he was found at the hospital. Not brought there. It is his sanctuary, his stage, and now, his tomb." I grabbed my hat. "You're saying he planted the real statue there?" "I'm saying he will end where he began," Wolfe murmured. "And if we are prompt, we may find both the penitent and his confession intact." Fritz moved toward the door instinctively, but Wolfe stopped him with a raised hand. "No, Fritz. This will not require cuisine, only endurance. Archie, get the car." He almost never leaves the house after dark, but I knew better than to argue. 10 minutes later, we were rolling through streets washed clean of everything except guilt. The hospital loomed ahead, grey against grey. The night porter recognized me from earlier and opened the side entrance without fuss. "Mr. Goodwin," he said nervously. "That Englishman, the one with the arm, he came back, said he forgot something in the chapel. He's still in there." Wolfe gave him a look sharp enough to slice silence. "Take us." The chapel smelled of candle wax and disinfectant, a combination that could have sanctified a morgue. Vale was kneeling near the small altar, not praying, not exactly moving either. For a second, I thought Wolfe had guessed right and we were looking at a body. Then Vale turned, calm, resigned. "I wondered if you'd come." Wolfe didn't move closer. "You should have fled." "I did," Vale said quietly. "From everything that mattered. There's no farther to go." He turned back to the altar. On its base, a section of plaster had been chiseled away. Nestled inside was the missing statue, whole, unburned, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. "I couldn't destroy it," Vale said. "It belonged to what little truth there was left." Wolfe's voice was soft but cutting. "Truth cannot be hoarded. It either illuminates or it devours. Which will this do?" Vale smiled faintly. "Perhaps both." He reached into his coat and produced a small revolver, the same caliber that had killed Telford. My hand went for mine, but Wolfe's glance stopped me cold. "Don't," he said. "He won't shoot us." Vale raised the gun, not at us, but at the statue. His voice was steady. "You said I mistook silence for peace. You were right. Peace isn't silence. It's finality." He fired once. The bullet hit the penitent dead center, shattering its chest. Bronze fragments clattered across the stone floor. Something small and pale slipped free from within and landed at Wolfe's feet. Vale exhaled once, a sound that was almost relief, then set the gun down on the altar and sat back against the pew. His eyes were open but unseeing. I crouched beside the fallen piece. It was a rolled scrap of vellum, smaller than a dollar bill, sealed with cracked red wax. I handed it to Wolfe, who inspected it with grave precision. "The true confession," he said. "Hidden inside the replica, not the original. The art of deceit perfected." "And Vale?" I asked. He glanced toward the still figure. "The final penitent." I checked for a pulse I already knew wasn't there. Wolfe didn't watch. He was unrolling the parchment with careful fingers. The Latin was clearer this time, the ink darker, preserved by centuries of concealment. He read a few lines under his breath, then stopped. "Archie," he said softly, "fetch the police." That wasn't like him. "You mean Kramer?" "Yes," he said, folding the paper. "Tell him he will find 2 corpses in one. One ancient, one modern." I started for the door, but he added, "And Archie, bring a priest." It wasn't sarcasm. It was something heavier. Kramer arrived 20 minutes later, his coat dripping on the chapel floor. He took one look at Vale and groaned. "You couldn't give me one clean arrest?" "Blame God," I said. "He writes the endings." Wolfe handed over the parchment. "You'll find it contains no useful evidence, only history. But it will please your superiors to seal it in an archive and forget." Kramer scowled. "You sure that's not what you're doing?" Wolfe turned toward the shattered statue. "I am incapable of forgetting, Inspector, but I am proficient at storage." That was enough for Kramer. He gave the orders, filled out the paperwork, and let the men take Vale's body away. The priest came quietly, muttered prayers that sounded more like apologies, and left a single candle burning on the altar. When the last uniform cleared out, Wolfe stood alone beside the wreckage, his hands folded behind his back. I waited, knowing he needed to finish thinking before I could get him out of there. At length he said, "Men have spent centuries carving saints out of sin. Tonight we witnessed the reverse." "Meaning?" "Meaning that the line between worship and confession is as thin as bronze," he said, "and just as easy to melt." We left without another word. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the chill of repentance. Back in the car, Wolfe closed his eyes. I drove in silence until we reached the brownstone. As we stepped inside, he paused at the office door. "Archie, have Fritz prepare coffee." "No beer." That was a first. "Feeling pious?" "Cautious," he said. "There are moments when indulgence tastes too much like absolution." I made the coffee, black and strong, and set it beside him. He didn't drink it right away, just sat there, the faint light from the orchids turning the lines of his face into something almost human. And that was when it hit me. The case was over, but the echo wasn't. The penitent had done its job. Everyone who touched it ended up confessing to something, even Wolfe in his own way. I turned off the lamp, leaving him with the faint hum of rain and orchids. The night had gone quiet, but it didn't feel clean. Some stories end in justice. This one just stopped talking. Wolfe didn't touch his coffee until it had gone cold. That was unusual, enough to worry me. He sat very still, eyes half closed, the weight of what had happened at the hospital still pressing on the room like leftover incense. The orchids hummed faintly in the warm air behind him, their perfume too calm for the thoughts floating between us. He spoke at last, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Archie, I find no satisfaction in this conclusion." "Which part?" I asked. "The corpse, the church, or the theology lesson?" "None. All," he said. "Justice has the odor of disinfectant tonight. Too clean, too absolute." I leaned on the desk. "It wasn't clean. Vale made sure of that. He killed himself, remember?" "He did not kill himself," Wolfe said, opening his eyes. "He performed an act of erasure. It differs only in intent. A man who removes his own name from history is not seeking death. He's seeking control." "Control's your line of work," I said, "which is why I recognize its futility." He pushed the cold cup aside and turned the sealed vellum over once in his hand. "This document will never leave my safe. Not because it should remain secret, but because it has already done its work. It exposed precisely what it needed to: human nature, stripped to bone. Meaning greed, guilt, and vanity. Meaning," he said, "that those three are indistinguishable when painted with faith." I didn't have an answer for that, so I just sat there, listening to the faint scrape of the city outside. The rain had stopped, but its echo clung to the windows like memory. Fritz came in, carrying a tray with the evening beer. Wolfe shook his head. "No, not tonight." Fritz froze, nodded once, and vanished like a ghost respecting a ritual. That's when I realized how heavy the silence was, the kind that didn't come from exhaustion, but from reflection. Wolfe finally looked at me and said, "Do you recall the first words Miss Telford spoke when she called?" "Yeah. My father's dead. Murdered." "Exactly. Not, my father has been killed, but murdered." It was both accusation and confession. She knew it the instant it happened, even before she touched the gun. That subconscious admission set this chain in motion. He paused, eyes drifting to the drawer that held the bronze fragment. "Every truth we uncovered began with a single misplaced word." "That's usually how it works," I said. "People write their own warrants." He nodded faintly. "As do we." It wasn't often Wolfe included himself in humanity's faults, but the night had been long and the ghosts too many. He stood, slowly, as though the air had thickened, and crossed to the window. His reflection looked carved in shadow, heavier than the city lights behind it. "Archie," he said, "if Kramer calls again, tell him the case is closed. Officially, legally, and metaphysically. There will be no follow-up, no press, no statements. The penitent is gone, and so is the sin." "Sure," I said, "but you're going to keep the statue, aren't you?" He turned slightly. "I shall keep its pieces. They are excellent bronze." "Art collector now?" He almost smiled. "Archivist of folly." I stayed quiet because that was the right move. Wolfe went back to his chair, sank into it with a soft grunt, and reached for his book. Plutarch, Lives of the Noble Greeks. The irony wasn't lost on me. He opened it, read a few lines, then closed it again. "There is a passage," he said without looking up, "where Plutarch writes that every man carries within him both a tyrant and a priest, and whichever he listens to decides the kind of ruin he makes. Vale listened to both." He leaned his head back. "Miss Telford will inherit her father's estate. She will donate most of it to some museum out of guilt. Hastings will die in prison, and Densmore will translate remorse into religion. All perfectly balanced." I said, "And you, Wolfe, you get balanced too." "I get quiet," he said. "That will suffice." He closed his eyes. I took that as dismissal, but I didn't leave. The room still carried the faint metallic tang of the broken statue, like sin turned tangible. I thought about Vale kneeling at the altar, about the way he'd looked when he fired that last shot. Wolfe had called it erasure, but it had felt like something closer to confession, a final exhale of everything a man can't explain to another. Fritz returned once more, silent as smoke, and set a fresh beer beside Wolfe anyway. He didn't touch it. I went to the door, paused, and looked back at him. "You know," I said, "if you ever start believing in forgiveness, the world's gonna lose its best cynic." His eyes opened halfway, the faintest glint of humor under them. "Forgiveness, Archie, is merely intelligence without evidence." That sounded like Wolfe's idea of prayer, so I left it there. I closed the office door quietly behind me. The house was still warm, and the smell of orchids followed me down the hall like a memory that refused to fade. Upstairs, I looked out at the street. The rain had washed the city clean for the night, though not enough to fool anyone. Somewhere out there, the last echo of the penitent was probably sinking into a storm drain, its confession finished. And inside, Nero Wolfe was already preparing for the next sinner who'd think intellect could outsmart consequence.